Welcome to today's episode of the Women in Medtech series in the Medtech Business Academy podcast. As always, I'm your host, Colleen Patterson. With me today are Barbara Strain and Stephanie Pitts, and we're also honored to have join us special guest Tamara Al-Yassin, CEO of The Nursing Beat, a nurse-driven digital media company dedicated to empowering the nursing community through daily insights, industry news, and career resources. With over 13 years of nursing experience and an MBA, Tamara leads the company in its mission to amplify the voices of nurses while driving growth and innovation in healthcare media. Welcome, Tamara. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Colleen. Thanks for having me all. Happy to be here.
Exciting. So the introduction to the podcast from Tamara was actually given to us by Stephanie Pitts. So Stephanie, tell us a little bit about your journey in meeting Tamara and, kind of why how we got to today.
Yeah, so I was at the SONCL, which is the Society of Nursing Innovators, Entrepreneurs, Leaders, and Scientists, and had the opportunity to meet one of the leaders of the Nursing Beat, who then introduced me to Tamara. And in learning what the Nursing Beat is doing, I love their platform, and I love that it was run by nurses. So who better to be representing the voice than nurses themselves? So very aligned on that mission, and have had the opportunity to get to know Tamara and the team from the Nursing Beat over the last year, I guess, and have just really enjoyed their mission and what they're doing. And I just thought it was right for us to hear more from Tamara. It's not every day you see a nurse as a CEO of a company either. So yeah, she's doing great things. So it's good to see you on the podcast today.
I think one of my favorite things that is a Stephanie constant is the idea of, but where's the nurses? So this feels very authentic that you were like, and here's the nurses. So Tamara, talk to us a little bit about kind of making that decision to change. We're hearing a lot these days about, clinicians really looking for where do I go from here? What's my next step? Becker's actually just put out a really interesting article that was talking about turnover. Gen Z is turning over at almost 40%, which seems incredible. And, you're at about 14% Gen X, about 19% for baby boomers. And that's been a real talk track is, what does the future of this look like? So tell us a little bit about, your history and what made you decide to take that leap into going beyond the bedside.
Yeah, I feel like we could do an entire podcast on staffing in healthcare and the changes that will need to be made in the next 10 years. But I guess I am part of that statistic. I worked clinically for 10 years. My primary specialties were emergency burn and trauma. And then, like many, honestly, during the pandemic, decided I needed a change. I was working in the emergency room. I saw a lot of inefficiencies, and I really wanted to contribute on a greater scale. And more importantly, I felt very fulfilled taking care of patients and treating patients, but I wanted to take a step back and take care of my people, my own nurses. So I ended up going to get my MBA while I was still working bedside part-time, and then graduated and really got the opportunity to build the Nursing Beat. I am a major fan of digital newsletters like The Skim and Morning Brew, Healthcare Brew, Snacks. There's many to follow. And what I admired about them was that they had short form content, easily digestible, where you could, stay up to date in 4 minutes or less in one email. And I always thought, why don't nurses have that? Or really clinicians? We do not have time to stay up to date with research, product updates, healthcare news, CE opportunities. And so, yeah, we built it in my apartment in San Francisco 3 years ago.
So obviously, when we're talking about, information delivery and ways to convey, one of the conversations that even our team internally earlier this year was having was the idea of right now, there's a lot of noise versus, being able to deliver facts. And so what are, when in that a lot of our audience is med tech, and we're looking to connect with your audience, which is like the nurses. How do you move, or what are some of the strategies you say to be like, okay, this is the type of information I want to convey. These are those high value items that I know my audience needs to know about. Because as you said, there's not enough time. There's no way to read every article or be up on every single piece of research. So how do you help condense that noise into these are the things that people really need to know?
Yeah, I think that there is a superpower in being niche in media and content. I think the general public, when you say healthcare professional, they group, I don't know, pharmacists with nurses, with MDs, and we have the same goals within healthcare, and that is to deliver safe patient care. But the information and resources that we need are different. And because we are nurse driven, I mean, we have a nurse on our board of directors down to almost every content contributor. The folks selling our advertisements are nurses. The folks managing our media campaigns are nurses. I do that on purpose because we deliver campaigns with more authenticity than most. And we also curate content with a lot of trust and authenticity. In the beginning, us being nurses, we thought, okay, these are like 5 pillars of content we think nurses are going to want to read about. It really was an educated guess. And then we built on that. So every month we'd go back and look at our analytics and see what was doing well, see what wasn't. And that's really been like an ongoing journey.
Well, that really sounds like the nurses I used to work with. I'm not a nurse. I'm a clinical person in a different world, and did a lot of work with all the departments. I want to say, take off on something that you said about Medtech, Colleen, and sort of twist it a little bit. I know one of the things that's so important is for med tech companies, no matter how small or large they are, to always go back to talking to the people that are actually going to use or help to develop products. How do you feel that was, generally when you were working, and how do you think it's going today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like Stephanie, you are at the pulse of this, really advocating for nurses within our space to be part of innovation. Nurses are the end user of many clinical products and technology, so they have to be considered when developing them. And in the hospital systems, you see product launches going wrong when there isn't a nurse teaching other bedside clinicians about that product, when there isn't a nurse with engineers developing the product and figuring out really how this is best used for that clinician. I would say even within 3 years, I've seen nursing and innovation blow up. I see in a positive way. I see nurses within healthcare conferences presenting and with their own businesses. More than I ever have before. I think there are massive improvements that corporations are doing as well to really bring nurses at the forefront of that. I will say too, it's not just about nurses. It's, MDs are, at the forefront of products and technologies too. Phlebotomists. I mean, there's so many different medical personnel that really need to be at the forefront of making those products.
The idea that you would get the person who's going to, or the persona that's going to be using it to weigh in on it during design, during dev, voice of the customer, sounds obvious. But as an industry, medtech still is slow to incorporate that. Steph, I know that that's a point of pride that you've had within your organization of, that's really a big item there. But, those kind of implementations of how medtech brings that to the table is not an overnight item. What are some of the strategies or ways that, your company has really said this is going to be an every time thing for us and not just something that's magically happened?
Yeah. So I think what's really resonating with me right now, Colleen, is I just came back from the SONCL Think Conference, and this is a shameless plug for SONCL, but to be in a room with, 100 nurse innovators, and actually goes back to my roots of meeting the nursing beat. There's a couple things that resonate. Tamara, you said it. Nurses' hands are often the last that really touch a product before it touches the patient. So to ensure that our input is there, but also even a step ahead of that is we know the problems that are in the dark corners. So that's actually how I got into medtech. Was I was putting PICC lines in babies, and there wasn't equipment that was the right size. My needles were as long as the femur of these kids. It was crazy. So to me, it was kind of fundamental in my entry into medtech. But one thing, that was really clear to me this past week at the Think conference was all of these nurses, Tamara, that dream of doing what you do, which is you worked as an emergency trauma nurse, and you mentioned you started, the nursing beat basically in your apartment. And so many of them have ideas. So many of them have these big dreams. And, many of us grew up in families where, our parents were like, you're going to work in this job and you're going to be a nurse and you're not going to leave the bedside for 30 years, et cetera. If you right now have the microphone on this podcast to talk to all the nurses that are going to listen in who are watching you, right, lead and be an entrepreneur. And I think any guidance that you can provide of how did you make that leap? How did you know it was the right thing? Because I think a lot of us have this imposter syndrome, like, am I the right person? Is this the right time? Do I have enough money? Can I take this risk? What if it doesn't work? Like, we have all these voices, right? Talk to us a little bit about that transition, because I know it's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, really, really big. Like thinking back 3 years ago on taking that risk, I think a lot of my colleagues and even my family was like, what are you doing? You have a really stable job with really great opportunities for upward trajectory within big hospital systems. Mm-hmm. I would say fear is always there. Telling people to be fearless is kind of fake. You have to be brave enough to push through that fear. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household where my dad started a small business the year I was born. And I watched him build that business for many years. And what I learned through him by answering his phones at 16 and watching him tinker at 10 o'clock at night in his garage is that, like, you have to want it more than anyone else in the room, and you have to push through your fear. And everything else you will figure out. Like, I have fallen so many times over the past 3 years, made so many mistakes. It doesn't matter. You're growing. This is the story, this is the story of you and how you're going to grow this business. And it takes a lot of mistakes, and it takes a lot of hard times that aren't pretty. We go to, I think the one thing that I'd like to do more of actually is showcase the hardships that are associated with building a business, because you go on LinkedIn, right? And there's all these announcements, new job, new title, like we just raised X amount. Do you know how many like dark moments there were before getting to that point? That's a goal for this year, is to be more transparent with what it really takes.
I mean, that's a big challenge, that social media has this sense of things are effortless, though you lose the weight, it comes off in a day. It's the instant gratification of the world. And it's, as Stephanie said, the idea of I'm holding myself to somebody else's metric, but a lot of what we see online is not the truth. So I do applaud the idea of what that transparency is, and that when you're taking these kind of risks on yourself of, whether it is starting a podcast, going out on your own, there's intrinsically, there's going to be challenges along the way. But it's really about how we're overcoming those challenges and what your network looks like. So what is one of the things that, as you were, founding the Nursing Beat, Tamara, and really looking at this is a moment where, hindsight's 2020, and you can go back and say, I didn't realize it at the time, but if I had made a different decision, I don't know that I would be here. What was that defining moment for you in your journey to where you are now of a decision, a person you brought on, a conference, joining Santiel? Where do you really say that you found your stride?
Oh man, working clinically, it was definitely the pandemic that changed things for me. I wanted to place control in my own life. And that was the inflection point to sort of changing, to pulling a 180 on my career. Mm-hmm. I would say with the Nursing Beat, it undoubtedly was the network, and particularly the network of females and female nurses. Being a female in business, I mean, I'm amongst a great group of women here, and I think we probably can all say that we have experienced levels of hardship. And for me, I went from a profession that was 85% plus female, where almost all my managers were female, to being primarily in male rooms. And that was a adjustment for sure. So the folks around me that I put around me as advisors were undoubtedly changed the Nursing Beat for me, because they became my advocates when we needed sales, when we needed content, when we needed anything really. I owe a lot to the Nursing Beat community that we built.
Tamara, I want to go back. One thing that we were talking about, failure, and I'm going to go back, but I'm going to push forward. So one of the things I think that's very common that we hear in innovation is fail fast. You're going to fail. So fail fast. You're going to fail often. But one of my favorite pieces of this is, and you talked about all the times that, you messed up, you had to keep going. One of my favorite things, though, somebody once told me, and I just hung on to this. So somebody probably famous said this, but they were like, you're not judged by how you fail. It's how you get back up and how you recover from that failure. And anytime like I've made a, big mistake, I that resonates in my soul. But with that, I think what's helped me work through failure is mentors. And you were just talking about the community and the different people that have been a guide for you. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think innovators and entrepreneurs, those that I see that are the most successful, have this mentorship web around them that's so strong. So how do you get that? How has that impacted you? And what advice would you maybe have for our listeners?
Yeah, I think that it's like crucial for any innovator. For me, I always knew I was going to start a business or many businesses. Even when I was a teenager, I just felt it. And when I went to nursing school, I knew that too. I knew sometime in the future that would be part of my story. When I made the decision that I wanted to try something new, I knew that I didn't know enough people in different sort of categories of businesses. Like I didn't know engineers. I didn't know folks in sales or in marketing. I never really worked with people outside of healthcare. So getting a general MBA was very important for me. I don't think that that's the solution for everybody, but I had the opportunity to meet folks that were in finance and marketing and could teach me. And when it was that time that I wanted to start a business, I could lean on them. That's one place, is school for sure. A second place is placing yourself at events or conferences or within associations. And there's a lot of really, really great conferences that we've had the opportunity to attend. One of them was health. And they had tons of nurse innovators there. I went to a networking event there while with the Nursing Beat and met so many nurse innovators who were like, oh, you need this? I know this web developer. Let me give you their number. Oh, you need a graphic designer? Don't worry. And that connection is so important. It's like vital to building your business. So there are different places and nursing organizations too, for sure, or any type of organization. The American Nurses Association has also helped us. They were one of our early advertisers. I was with them since I was in nursing school. So when I came back to them and said, hey, I have a business now, they were more than willing to support. So yeah, I feel like that was a long-winded answer, but lots of different ways.
No, it was a fun answer because you covered so many different areas and things. So sort of building off that is what's kind of next in your mind for either something different or the nursing beat changing, or I know your mind's not just sort of satisfied and you're going to lean back on your laurels there. So what are you thinking about?
Well, specifically with the nursing beat, we want to reach every nurse in the US and we want to support them at different levels in their career. So it could be a nursing student who needs mentorship and help. It could be a new grad who's going through their residency program and having a hard time or needing help, learning a particular type of content to help them with patient care. It could be the nurse that was like me, who doesn't know what to do next and is like, should I go to school? Should I stay here? What do I do? How do I figure that out? When I look at the nursing bee, I want it to be an ecosystem for a nurse throughout their entire trajectory of their career, which makes it really important for us to catch nurses early. I want them to grow up with us. So supporting the Gen Z and millennial population is really important for us and understanding what they need. So yeah, I would say, top of mind for me is nursing beat. And that is definitely, as we begin to build sort of the next level of what that looks like, I always have sort of that in the back of my mind.
Tamara, as specifically as you're talking about, wanting to be able to deliver solutions that these clinicians need, and we all know that medtech is a key to doing that. Are you seeing anything in terms of trends, or this is the type of feedback that we get often that you think medtech should know today, or is that still a direction that you're moving in as far as gathering some of that information? One of the most interesting parts to me of the mentorship was that if you ask people more often than not are like, oh, here's something for you. So if you could say anything to MedTech about how they could support those clinicians in a better way, what would you offer for them?
Yeah, we've been fortunate enough to interact with a lot of folks in MedTech, whether it be subscribers reaching out to us or being at conferences and events. I would say there's key pain points in medtech with respect to nurses and nurse innovators. One is funding, for sure. I feel like there could be a lot of opportunities to fund nurse-led innovation. We work with a plethora of brands who are really doing a great job of that. So that's sort of a big push for us this year. And then the entire support of that nurse entrepreneur is something that we're always going back to and thinking about. It's really, really important for sure.
It definitely sounds like budgeting has been a key item, especially post-pandemic. Hospital funding has been shorter than ever. I'm starting to notice that in my trending as far as conference attendees of, people being able to show up. And so a lot of what you were talking about, clinicians have a lot of that noise. How do I get the CE credits? How do I stay on top of news? Well, some of the traditional avenues, which was I'm going to go to conference, I'm going to hear about all the latest and greatest, that we're seeing a higher trend of people joining virtually or not getting an opportunity to see some of those things. So I do think the idea of some of those scholarships, sponsorships, it's tangible on how do we create some of that impact. One of the questions that I have that has been, it seems to really be a trending topic right now, though, is AI in healthcare. And so, being a clinician yourself, being able to liaise with all of these clinicians, what's the vibe right now? Is that something that people are really looking forward to? It seems to be fairly mixed of, is this the right time? Is the technology really there? Is the quality of the technology really there? So what are some of your thoughts on what that landscape looks like today and, the direction that we're hoping it's going to go tomorrow?
Yeah, I think even in 3 years, it's changed so much amongst the community, that we serve, thoughts and ideology around AI and healthcare. I feel like when we initially, a couple of years ago, nurses were apprehensive about AI in, technology and services within healthcare. That is starting to change. There is the understanding that this movement has arrived, and we will continue to use AI in healthcare. And so now it's really about figuring out, how do we get nurses at the forefront of this? How do we make sure that if there is AI implemented in hospital systems, that we're doing it that is safe for the patient and also makes sense for the nurse? I think there was also some skepticism around AI taking away jobs. I've seen that shift a little to be more that AI will provide different job opportunities for clinicians, such as telehealth and virtual care. Stephanie, you're also at the forefront of this. I'd love to hear sort of what you're seeing as well.
Yeah, I think the big message is, I'll tell you, I went to an innovation conference like 2 years ago, and there were all these digital health companies talking about AI. And I would look at their board and their people at their booth, and they weren't including nurses. And so the big transition I've seen, and I think it's helped the healthcare community, is if you're developing a tool that a nurse is going to use, you really should have nurses guiding your company or being on the front line, being on the end, like working with you. And we've started to see that in the industry, where a lot of these companies that are building these AI tools are hiring nurses and nurse leaders. And I think it's just absolutely mandatory. So that's the big shift I think I've seen change, which I think is necessary. But also on the implementation of AI, I think we're all using it in some capacity, if not on a daily basis, constantly, between, and I'll keep brands out of it, but, it helps me to write. It helps me to answer questions. The trend that just went out with the make your own action figure. I don't know if you guys did that or not, but loved that trend. I try to incorporate it both professionally, but also having a little bit of fun with it too. And I think that's important. But I think within healthcare, we've got to take some of these tasks off of our bedside nurses. And if AI can help do that, I envision a future where it maybe the burden of documentation and the burden of tasks is gone. And we can go back to what I experienced as a new grad, which was actually caring for my patient.
Yeah.
And that's my hope. And I'm an optimist, so I might be a little dreamy there, but I really hope that it can take tasks away and get us back to being closer to the patient eventually.
Yeah, I was recently at a nursing leadership conference, and we were doing a discussion on AI, and a nurse got up and said that they just implemented on their unit an AI tool where after your 12-hour shift, basically an auto summary will populate for the next nurse of trends to see within the patient, of meds to be aware of. A better summary than I will argue a human could probably generate, because how many things have happened in 12 hours that you need to catch? It's like nearly impossible. Your brain's like combusting at the end of the shift. So things like that are just like so valuable, not just to nurse, but safety and like things like handoff within the hospital system.
We do project time cards, and it's like you get to the end of the day and you're like, what did I work on this morning? How long did that take me? Who did I say I was going to email again?
Yeah.
I'm of the age where it's, if I don't write it down, it's gone forever. Like I told you I was going to do that. Nope. Did you watch me physically write a note? It's not going to happen. So I love And Stephanie, to your point, when you're looking at the trend of task load over time for nurses, we're asking more. We're asking more of every single person, and it's not like we added more bodies, to say, hey, I now, instead of having 40 hours of work in a day, it's going to be 60. Let me get you another person to share. We're just asking more of people. So I think that that's a great point of how do we alleviate some of that task burden and do care delivery? Because that's what clinicians aren't getting into the practice of medicine in order to do paperwork. That's a byproduct of what we need to do. We do have a couple more minutes though, friends. So Stephanie, any final questions for Tamara?
Yeah, Tamara, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you over the last year, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I think, looking ahead, your future as a CEO and the future of the nursing beat, what do you think the next 6 to 12 months will look like, either for you personally or professionally with the nursing beat?
Oh gosh, loaded question. So many things. I think personally, as I was saying prior, I'd love to do a better job of showcasing behind the scenes of myself and our business, and its effect on personal life, on professional life. I think it's really important to have that transparency with folks. We have there's people reading and watching us, and we have a platform now. And I think it's our job to really showcase sort of what it takes. I think for the nursing beat, what's always at the forefront is putting nurses first in media. We need to be in charge of telling our own stories. And continuing to do that in multiple categories. We are primarily female. We are a strong consumer group, maybe one of the strongest consumer groups in the world. We have power in numbers, and we need to transform our story because I think we have more power than we think.
Yep. Love that.
Good answer.
I like your little shower of hearts, Stephanie.
Yeah, shower of hearts. We'll always remember that.
Yeah.
My big thing is I really liked when you'd say, be brave to push through the fear, because too many people just associate it with fear. And I wrote it down so I don't forget, because it's a great mantra. And you've really showcased that well. And keep doing what you're doing and really highlight what's really going on out there. Thanks so much.
Tamara, I want to say thank you for joining us today. Your story of really how to come to be and seeing something in your own life of saying, like, I've got more than this in me. I could make a difference. They talk about be the change you want to see in the world. And so it can be scary to strike out on your own, to do things, to risk failure, but greatness is only achieved by putting yourself out there. So really appreciate you sharing your story, joining us here today. For our audience, if you have not already done so, be sure to subscribe to never miss a future episode and take the opportunity to check out the Nursing Beat. They've got some incredible information. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope that you have a great one.